I have always been driven. I am 27. My baby is my career in finance. Since I graduated from college, I have given it my whole attention. In a short period of time, I have developed a strong reputation by combining diligence, timing, and maybe some luck. I have reached benchmarks few men do not till they are in their mid-30s. Though I dislike boasting, I'm glad with what I have done. Yes, the work can be difficult occasionally, but the sense of accomplishment makes it all worthwhile. Mark, my 30-year-older brother, has not had the same drive. He wanders from one job to the next without truly finding his feet. Growing up, it always felt as though our parents were in his hands no matter what. Negative marks. It was the teacher's responsibility. Showing up for dinner on time? He received a lot of compliments. Me too. It was unique. Nothing I did was ever quite satisfactory. Success notwithstanding, there was always "don't get cocky" or "you're only as good as your last win." I suppose it toughened me, but it also made me feel like an alien in my own family. Family get-togethers have always been stressful, but lately, it's become much worse. Last year it began at Thanksgiving. Mark said sarcastically about finance professionals being soulless number crunchers devoid of leisure activities. I dismissed it, but when everyone else, including my parents, joined in, it hurt. A few weeks later, he stated casually that layoffs had been announced by my business over a laid-back dinner at my parents' house. Though my employment wasn't impacted, he inquired whether I was concerned. I felt at the time he was merely needling me, but it sowed mistrust. Odd events began occurring at work about the same time. Emails I knew I had sent vanished. Meetings I was meant to participate in were canceled without my knowledge. And I heard coworkers murmuring about things I apparently said or did. I discounted it at first as miscommunication, but it kept getting worse. Months of effort had gone into a promotion. My supervisor had even made hints that I was a strong candidate. Then out of the blue, the promotion went to someone else. When I asked for comments, my supervisor expressed worries about my professionalism, more especially a rumor that I had been disparaging of colleagues to clients. It hit right out of the gut. I never would act in that manner. When I insisted on specifics, my supervisor simply shut me off. I became somewhat suspicious. This was not random. Someone was fooling about with me, but someone, and why? Though it seemed absurd, Mark's remarks on my employment kept returning to me. How would he possibly come upon my work? Still, it was difficult to overlook how often he brought up really precise elements. He remarked casually at Christmas about a new client my business had acquired in the tech sector, a detail I had only learned the day before in a private conference. He merely grinned and said he read it somewhere. When I inquired how he knew, there seems to be something wrong. Mark's way of life was likewise shifting. He had always been bad with money, but lately he was dressed in fancy clothes and talking about a vacation to Europe. He became hostile when I made lighthearted jokes about his glow-up, claiming he had been saving years. It added nothing. Of course, my parents seemed not to pay attention or care. Saying I was jealous because he was finally getting his life together, they dismissed my worries. The last straw surfaced on my work laptop when I came across an email. It was in my rubbish folder and initially appeared to be spam, but reading that, my blood ran cold. The email mentioned a mutual understanding with my brother and offered nebulous specifics on the workings of my department. Though I couldn't make sense of it, it was enough to drive me over the line. I came to face Mark. That confrontation went about just how you would have expected. Laughing in my face, he said I was losing it. He discounted the email as a coincidence when I brought it up. His side was taken by my parents, naturally. My mother responded, "You're working too hard. You have to unwind. You are seeing things." 1 week later, everything peaked at work. My manager phoned to have a frank conversation. Another complaint had been made against me, this one alleging I had given a competitor significant information leaks. The walls seemed to be squeezing in. I disputed everything, but my manager indicated my employment was in jeopardy, and the claims were alarming. I realized I couldn't just watch this unfold. Someone was out to pick me, whether or not Mark participated. I had questions and sought responses. I made the decision to start looking after things myself. Whatever was happening, I was resolved to find out, even if it meant separating my family in the course of it. It began with an apparently unconnected incident. I was fixing their laptop when visiting my folks. They had been grumbling about how slow it was and how improperly it sent emails. I came upon an open shared family bank statement left on another tab while troubleshooting. Though I was not looking for snooping, something caught my attention. A string of regular transactions headed straight to Mark's account, marked Support Fund. The amounts were not little either. It was sufficient to explain the expensive clothing, the holidays, everything. His parents had always been there for him financially, but this was different. Only a few months before my problems at work started, these payments had begun. It seemed rather like too much of a coincidence. I couldn't get rid of the sense later that evening that these payments were connected to the turmoil in my work life. Though what I had observed thus far appeared dubious, it felt far-fetched. I had to probe more, but I couldn't do it by myself. I paid a private investigator the next morning. Though I needed responses, maybe it was overdone. The PI operated quickly. One week, they found something that made my jaw drop. Mark had been corresponding via emails with a rival company. These emails included thorough, private information on initiatives of my team. The worst is that they were written as though they originated from me, framing me as the source of the leaks. My brother had gone to tremendous efforts to pass for me. Reading the report made me unwell. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to see my folks. I walked them over the bank transfers and discussed what the PI had discovered. I anticipated amazement, possibly even indignation. Rather, they laughed it off. They argued Mark would never act so dishonestly, and stated the money was only meant to enable him to get back on his feet. They advised me to cool out as I was overreacting. I left their house more alone than I had ever felt. Things grew more intense when a co-worker approached me at the office. They had heard someone referencing my name in relation to the released data. Claiming I was unreliable, someone apparently tried to warn them about me. My co-worker considered it odd enough to bring up and disagreed. Mark was clearly deliberately trying to damage my reputation, not only dispensing facts to a rival company. That Saturday I addressed Mark once more. He hardly even tried to refute it this time. He grinned and added, "Maybe I'm better at your job than you think," during a furious dispute. That one sentence sealed everything. He was not repentant. He knew well what he was doing. When I tried to discuss it with my parents later, they wouldn't answer my calls. They seemed to be shutting ranks around him, discounting whatever I said. Although their obvious partiality was almost ridiculous, it also begged a new issue. Were they more involved in this than they were reporting? As I went over my own records, I came across several little withdrawals I couldn't identify. Though they were little enough I wouldn't have noticed them otherwise, they connected to a family account we set up years ago. Though I still couldn't quite see exactly how it fit, it felt like another piece of the jigsaw. One of my close friends questioned what was going on when she observed I was unfocused. They were not shocked when I went over everything. They brought back all the times my family had been manipulative in the past, particularly with regard to setting me against Mark. They exhorted me to keep strong and not let them pull me down. Though little, it was the encouragement I needed to push on. Things were declining at work. After more rounds of false evidence against me appeared, I was formally warned. I couldn't fault my employer for his growing lack of patience. I started to feel bad without strong evidence of what was truly happening. Suddenly then, I received a note from Mark's ex-girlfriend. She claimed to have material that might be of use to me. When we got together at a coffee shop, her story astounded me. Mark apparently had boasted to her about undermining my career. He had even made hints that my parents were assisting him. She lacked all the specifics, but she promised to search her old emails and messages for anything damning. I discovered something odd visiting my parents' place about the same time. A few sticky notes caught in the back of a kitchen drawer caught my eye. Though the notes were vague, they addressed dates that matched some of the problems I had experienced at work and named my employer. Though I wasn't sure what to do with it yet, it felt like a smoking pistol. It was quite evident by now this was more than I had imagined. Mark was not acting alone. My parents' behavior was growing more dubious daily. This was a concerted attempt to bring me down, not merely sibling conflict. I understood I had to keep on. Time was running out to expose the whole truth, whatever it took. Meeting Mark's ex, I couldn't overlook what she had told. She told me that although Mark had boasted about undermining my career, it wasn't the worst of it. She had heard my parents discussing how to make the strategy feasible. She said they were actively supporting him, not only aware of what he was doing. She sent screenshots of text exchanges she had preserved where my brother and dad talked about ways to discredit me at work. The books were direct and terrifying. They discussed starting false rumors, making me untrustworthy, and making sure I wouldn't be promoted. Knowing it would affect me most then, my dad even recommended timing the sabotage to coincide with big projects at work. Having this proof at hand, I visited my company. I gave them enough to question the charges against me, even though I didn't show them everything, because I didn't want to air all of my family's dirty linen. They decided to wait on any more action until they personally looked at things. It seemed for the first time in months that I might not lose my job after all. I began distancing myself from my family at the same time. I avoided Mark totally and stopped phoning my folks. Knowing they had been cooperating to damage my reputation, I couldn't pretend everything was good. A few days later, out of the blue, my parents called. They begged me to halt whatever vendetta I had against them and charged me with breaking apart the family. They danced around the subject, suggesting I was misreading things and should let it go. They did not outright deny anything. I hung up without saying anything. There was nothing to say left. Mark began writing me notes at that point, originally mocking Barb's. They accused me of being overly sensitive and acting the victim. They then grew gloomier. If I didn't back off, he threatened to reveal information about me and charged me with destroying his life. It was ridiculous. He had nothing to expose, but the escalation revealed just how desperate he was growing. Digging further, the private investigator discovered even more upsetting material. Along with supporting Mark's sabotage, my parents paid off other people to assist. This included a former co-worker of mine who had been urged to start office rumors about me. My parents were at the hub of a full-fledged conspiracy. Things at work started to change in my favor about the same time. A few colleagues who had first been aloof came up to me personally to apologize for believing the stories. One of them even said they knew about Mark's participation and felt it unfair how I had been handled. As if the tide was changing, Mark then tried something that flopped quite horribly. He put a slew of evasive, passive-aggressive notes on social media. Though they didn't specifically name me, it was clear who he meant. He grumbled about people acting as victims and about not being able to withstand competition. The posts were explicit enough that mutual friends began asking me whether everything was fine, yet they were vague enough to avoid direct incrimination. That was the last push I had to give legal action any thought. After seeking legal advice on my choices, I began gathering evidence for slander and fraud. Between the books, the variances in income, and the PI's conclusions, I had more than enough to bring before the court. Given how much the sabotage had hampered my career, my attorney also advised investigating occupational damages. Suddenly, a distant relative extended out to me. Although we were not close, the family grapevine had heard about the turmoil. They related tales to me about how, even in childhood, my parents had always supported Mark. They recalled occasions when I had been disciplined for things he had done, and how my parents had always minimized his negative behavior. It was interesting to hear, but it also confirmed the depth of this inclination toward bias. Among the most unexpected changes came from the rival company that had been disseminating misleading information. My PI was able to connect with someone from their team who acknowledged Mark had misled them. They said they were sorry for their part and verified that the material had been identified inside as dubious. This was the last thing my company needed to totally clear my name. A few days following this epiphany, my folks showed up at my flat without warning. Insisting they had just acted out of love, they looked terrified and begged me to pardon them. Still, they insisted on not owning responsibility, writing it off as a misinterpretation. I said to them straightforwardly that I was done with them unless they came clean about everything. For me, that chat marked a sea change. I came to see that moving on, I didn't need their apologies. They had revealed to me their true selves, and I believed them. I resolved right then that I would not allow Mark or anyone else to continue dictating my life. Setting everything out in one location came next. Days of gathering every piece of proof I had, the private investigator's results, screenshots from Mark's ex, the texts linking my parents to the plot, and the financial variances from our joint account. Though it was airtight, seeing everything all together was daunting. They could not have talked their way out of this. I convened a family gathering, which proved difficult to plan. Mark seemed to believe the whole thing was a joke, while my parents were still avoiding most of my calls. They grudgingly consented, though. When I urged them, it would be in their best interest, and I had something significant to contribute. We gathered at the traditional neutral ground, my folks' residence. I arrived ready with hard copy versions of the proof. The environment changed as soon as I started outlining what I had discovered. Mark's smile vanished the moment he came over the screenshots from his ex. When I brought up the bank statements and the notes I had discovered in their drawer, my parents exchanged anxious looks. The case that developed was explosive. Backed into a corner, my brother acknowledged everything in an angry outburst. Claiming my parents had pushed him to behave, He raged that it wasn't entirely his fault. "They wanted me to even the playing ground," he exclaimed. "You assume I developed all of this on my own?" My parents entered the picture then, attempting to defend their behavior. They claimed they only wanted to ensure Mark had a fair chance, and accused me of being too successful. By emphasizing so much on my career, my dad even dared to say I had left the family behind. Their treachery was presented as love and a call to family togetherness. But the more they spoke, the more precisely it all had been calculated. They worked every technique in the book to guilt-trip me into silence, said this would destroy the family. They said I would come to regret publishing this, saying they were only trying to keep us together. My mother even started crying at one point. Though it was messy, I kept cool. I informed them there would be repercussions, and that their actions lacked a justification. The next day, I presented my results to my company. This time, I let go without restraint. I turned over the whole dossier, including documentation proving Mark had passed for me, and confirmation of his correspondence to the rival company. Although surprised, my company was pleased that I had managed the matter so properly given the circumstances. They totally cleansed my record and sent a company-wide statement attesting to my innocence. It was as though a weight had been taken off my back. Moving to a new city seemed as though one were entering another planet. I came into a lively community, full of really friendly and encouraging people. The relocation felt like I had left all the turmoil and ugliness behind, not only physically. I didn't have to worry about running across family strife or defending myself against baseless claims for the first time in years. It was like a fresh sheet. Professionally, things were lining up in ways I hadn't thought possible. The senior post I had been elevated to in my former company opened the door to an even more larger possibility. One of a reputable company in my field contacted me and presented a job that not only guaranteed a large pay increase, but also solidified my professionalism. It was evidence that the sabotage had not defined me, therefore validating all I had worked for. My personal life grew along with my job. I began developing closer ties with the people around me. New mentors and friends entered roles my family had once occupied, but this time the relationships were positive and mutually reinforcing. I wasn't staring over my shoulder, waiting for the next treachery all the time. I had substituted something real for the toxins. Back home, the fallout from all I had discovered kept washing over my family. Mark's financial problems become more severe. He battled to make ends meet without a consistent income, and with his reputation destroyed. Through mutual friends, I learned he had attempted applying for many jobs. Unfortunately, word of his behavior had leaked, and nobody wanted to risk him. His previously ostentatious way of life has faded to desperation. Not much better were my folks doing. They had moved into a smaller apartment far from their old social circle, after selling their house to pay restitution payments and legal expenses. Their isolation was practically total. Most of their friends had withdrawn themselves, reluctant to be around with people whose behavior had become so public. It was a symbolic descent from grace, one that seemed to mirror their lack of authority over me. Still, they made sporadic attempts to reach out, sending letters and gifts bearing comments about how they missed me and yearned for things to be different. But I couldn't participate since they refused to own responsibility for their acts. I returned everything, keeping the limits I had painstakingly created. Though difficult, it was absolutely vital. The restitution payments from my brother and parents, meanwhile, gave a financial cushion not anticipated. With such tools, I rebuilt fast and followed stages I might not have been able to afford otherwise. Using the money to make decisions that would position me for long-term success, I paid myself and my future forward investments. In the middle of all this, a distant cousin I hadn't seen in years got in touch. Having heard about everything, they wanted to say how much they respected my approach. They related their own experiences of being passed over and discounted in their family, and they claimed my narrative had given them the confidence to defend themselves. It was a humble experience that let me realize I wasn't as alone as I had felt. Furthermore, pouring in was public support, focusing on my resiliency over treachery. The local news coverage of the court case had shown me in a favorable manner. People in my new neighborhood came over to celebrate my capacity to overcome obstacles. Their support was a continual reminder that the betrayal, as terrible as it had been, did not define me. One of the most important turning points came when I appeared in a big trade newspaper, framing me as a rising star in my sector. The paper highlighted my professional successes and tenacity. Seeing my name printed connected to something beautiful and affirming felt like the perfect justification. It was evidence that I had grabbed everything my family had hurled at me and converted it into success gasoline. Mark left my life totally over time, stopped reaching out, too preoccupied with his own problems to keep any link. Though it was sad, it offered closure to a turbulent relationship that ended quietly. Regarding my parents, their slide persisted. Selling their house had signaled the end of their financial stability, and without their previous social ties to rely on, they were left to deal with the fallout from their choices. They were living a lot quieter life, far detached from the picture they had formerly projected, last I heard. A note from another far-off relative marked one unanticipated moment of thanks. They wrote to let me know that my narrative had motivated them to quit a years-long poisonous relationship they had been caught in. It served as a sobering reminder of how far I had come, knowing that my experience had given someone else hope. Looking back, it's difficult to comprehend all that has transpired. The treachery, the repercussions, the court cases. It all feels like another lifetime. Still, I came out stronger, more self-assured, and more independent than I had ever been. Though it's not the narrative I would have chosen, this chapter of my life is closed, and one I'm glad I conquered. Story 2. Hey everyone, Elena, 31F, here is James, my 33-year husband, and I have 5 years of marriage. I felt our connection was really well until lately. We have always taken great satisfaction in honest communication, no holding back, no resentment brewing. It has worked mostly for this. We always manage to compromise. We discuss things over dinner, or on those peaceful walks around the neighborhood. For background, I am in software development. It has dominated much of my life. I began in an entry-level job and worked my way up slowly. I secured a lead developer post just before Noah, our infant, arrived. Actually, I was delighted as this is the kind of job I had been aiming for years. The fresh obligations, running a small crew. Though it's challenging, it also seems like I'm doing something I'm actually excellent at. It's about the sensation of achievement as much as the payback. About 6 months ago then, everything changed. That's when Noah entered our life. Although it's been amazing, becoming a mother has also been a whirl-around. James and I had sort of a plan. We agreed to take care of things between the two of us, using some assistance from a part-time nanny few days a week. At first, as I would guess it is for most new parents, it was disorganized, but we discovered a rhythm. Knowing that James, or the babysitter, had things handled, I could concentrate on the days I spent at work. At home, Noah dominated whatever I did. I assumed we had it all worked out, but James began suggesting things around a month after Noah was born. First, it was subtle. He would remark on how fortunate we were to be able to take time off for maternity leave, and on how great it was to have Noah around in those first weeks. I paid hardly any attention to it. He had always been encouraging of my career, hence I dismissed it as new dad nonsense, but he brought it up once more explicitly, when my leave was drawing to a conclusion. One morning we were drinking coffee when he abruptly advised me to consider a longer break from work. He presented it as beneficial for Noah, how his first year would be if his mother were there full-time. He also discussed how we may change our budget, decrease some costs, and find it feasible. I recall being taken aback. He clearly gave it some careful thinking, not as though he was demanding it. I told him that I needed the balance between job and parenting to feel like myself, and that returning to work was vital to me. I felt he understood. He brought it up once more, though, the following week, this time during supper with his folks. He commented casually how wonderful it would be for Noah if I could just focus on being a mom, how a lot of families make that choice. His mother nodded in agreement, related tales of being a stay-at-home parent James's young age. I sat there, feeling as though the talk had veered off course without me. I felt startled, like though I should be thinking about this right away. When we were alone after dinner, I told James it wasn't fair to put me in that position. That I'd taken it that way truly startled him. Not anything he was pushing me into. He said he believed it was just an idea worth discussing. Still, it felt more than just a laid-back recommendation now. It seemed as though a larger conversation, one I had not noticed we were having, was underway. James argued simply that his employment could help us. Years of working in finance have paid him well. Indeed, financially, we could make it work with just his income. For me, though, it was not the goal. I brought up how our combined pay let us keep a lifestyle we both liked, how it provided a cushion for unanticipated costs, and how it let us save more for Noah's future. More than that, I discussed how much my career meant to me for my sense of freedom and identity, as much as for the salary. Things grew tight from there. I could sense our changing relationship. He seemed to have no idea why I would want to remain working when it wasn't absolutely necessary financially. And given how much I liked my job, I couldn't understand why he was so obsessed on me remaining home. We were speaking different languages. However, it seemed as though we were having the same repeated conversation. Trying to make sense of it all, I occasionally vented to my close friends, reminding me that my happiness and job counted too. They advised me to ground myself. Hearing it felt fantastic, but it didn't change James and I's situation. That is, our impasse. At last, he advised me to think about perhaps going part-time rather than giving up completely. I agreed to consider it, but I made it plain that I had no choice than to quit. We agreed to have another chat in a few months, believing that time would enable us both to get some clarity. Still, the embarrassingness persisted. Tired but pleased of what I had done that day, every time I returned home from work I could see this look on James's face, like he felt I needed to be somewhere else. And when I would spend the entire weekend concentrating on Noah, he would make brief remarks regarding how I should just enjoy these moments more. Though I'm not sure if he intended to, it felt like he was reminding me all the time that, in his perspective, I wasn't where I should be. Seeking any outside viewpoint, I finally resolved to solve my conundrum online. I ended myself here telling our tale, and wondering whether anyone else had gone through anything like this. Though I'm not sure where this will lead, I have to find a way through this before it drives us more apart. Since my last post, then, things have gotten more intense. James and I had decided to give the entire stay-at-home mother topic some downtime, but obviously, he had other ideas. One Saturday during a late breakfast set it all in motion. James abruptly brought up the topic once more, as we were enjoying a great brunch at home. Pancakes, coffee, the works. He advised us on how we might make it work if we dropped some of our expenses, such as gym memberships or date evenings. Having even run the figures, he said we would be fine should I not return to work full-time. It took me totally by surprise. Though he had been considering it the entire time, I had assumed we would table this conversation. Given that I had worked so hard to become where I am, I told him I wasn't ready to give up my profession just like that. The discussion descended rapidly into a fight. Knowing how much my work meant to me, I questioned him why he persisted in pressing this. He kept saying, what would be best for Noah, not about my employment. It felt so annoying overall, like we were circling around. Then, seemingly on cue, his parents showed up that afternoon without warning. Of course, the talk turned back to me being home with Noah, even though they had been intending to come by to see him, talking about all the special moments she'd had with James and his siblings. His mother noted how she had remained home with them when they were small. His dad also spoke, noting that kids thrive when they have a parent at home. I just sat there, thinking I was being ganged up on. It was at that instant that I understood James's parents might have been shaping his viewpoint all through. It finally made apparent why he had been working so relentlessly. I had nowhere in my corner that day since my own family resides out of state and is not as interested. I spoke to James about how unfair it felt to be under pressure like that once his parents departed. To help with this, that we visit a couples therapist. He wasn't on board. We should not bring in a stranger to fix our problems, he remarked. We finally reached a sort of compromise, at least what I thought of as one. Thinking it could help ease some of our conflict, I agreed to temporarily cut my work hours. Perhaps he would back off on the overall quitting concept if he saw me spending more time with Noah, but I discovered it wasn't as easy as I'd thought. As I started working less hours, dealing with less time to manage my obligations was challenging, and I could feel pressure developing at work. Even with the smaller schedule, my supervisor made hints suggesting I should stay on top of things. It made me concerned that I would be compromising my work merely to maintain domestic calm. Then, though, a fresh turn emerged. James arrived home one evening with this announcement. He had been discussing with his boss the prospect of us moving to a smaller town. He apparently had discovered somewhere where his living expenses were less, and he felt it would make it easier for me to think about staying home. He presented it as a fresh start, a fantastic opportunity. I found it hard to believe. He had developed all these ideas behind my back, without even asking me. He seemed to be trying to arrange things so that I would have to give up my employment without option. I asked him why he hadn't considered including me in such a significant decision. Things blew out at that point. He said he was just trying to do what was best for Noah, that he had no intention of undercutting me. From where I stood, though, he seemed to be attempting to control everything. That evening, we were rather into it. It seemed like he wanted me to give up all I had worked for, simply to fit into this picture of what he believed our family should look like. Reversing himself, he claimed to be only looking out for Noah, and that he thought I would appreciate having a simpler life without work stressing me out. He seemed not to be listening to a word I spoke. Desperate for some outside view that evening, I headed back to Reddit, asking whether James was the one oversteering or whether I was being irrational. I wrote an update on everything that had happened since my last post. The answers arrived flooding in and were all over the lot. Some advised me to keep my ground. I should not let anyone push me into giving it up. I deserve a career. Others said that perhaps I should give James's point of view more thought. Staying home with Noah could be a benefit, and I might regret lost early years. The mixed comments simply puzzled me further. I began to wonder about myself. Was I truly putting my family second in terms of my career? Was I being abstinct for no other reason than convenience? Every time I tried to concentrate on my task, those uncertainties kept invading my head. But then at work, something unanticipated occurred. After a meeting, a colleague drew me aside and mentioned she observed my stress level. She told me about her own experience juggling employment and parenthood, including her struggles as well. Finally, she established a rhythm, like it was such a little matter. Hearing her story made me feel as like I wasn't entirely isolated in this. It made me consider perhaps it was time for an honest, real chat with James, one in which we might arrange everything free from all the noise, that of his parents' influence or the weight of prior choices. Though it wouldn't be simple, I knew we couldn't continue like way. I only wanted to find out whether he would be game to meet me midway.